Dark Souls 3 is an action role-playing game developed by From Software and released under Bandai Namco in 2016. It is the fourth and most recent installment in the Souls series of games, which originally stemmed from the 2009 game Demon's Souls. The Souls series is characterized by its brutal and dreary world design, obscure gameplay mechanics, almost unhealthy obsession with the undead, and of course, staggeringly powerful bosses. Bosses are a huge component of Dark Souls 3, serving as milestones in the game that block your progress and ability to freely explore the world. Beating a boss is an incredible challenge, but doing so opens up the game to more discovery and exploration. Dark Souls 3 contains a whopping 19 bosses, 13 of which are required to be defeated just to complete the game. At first glance, it may seem like a lot of these bosses feel a bit similar, just a bunch of undead guys in armor swinging things at you while you dodge for your life, but there's actually a lot of variation in these foes. Appearances and fighting styles are some examples. You may be fighting an enormous cursed tree that can destroy you in a single swipe, or perhaps you're battling a swarming mass of undead deacons whose little hits adds up over time. Another major element that clarifies and distinguishes the bosses from one another are the musical tracks accompanying them. Now, using music as a tool for characterizing things is a classic and almost incidental aspect of games. Sometimes we even forget about the composer's purposeful intent because it's so intuitive. One game I always bring up that really nails this ability to characterize using music is Okami. In the game, you've got your tiny sidekick Isun, whose theme is full of goofy sound effects and light instrumentation. And then you've got your demonic Ninetales, whose threatening battle music is filled with forceful brass and eerie vocals. Even if you don't know who they are, just listening to their themes give you such a clear idea of their personalities and their role in the story. The music of Dark Souls 3 works well to characterize each of the bosses, with every boss having their own unique theme. What I plan to do in this video is take a look at 4 different boss battle themes, and dissect how exactly they are able to characterize the boss's style, personality, and role in the game. Well, let's get started. This piece opens with this gentle, expressive choir in strings. With the battle taking place in this massive church and against a pontiff, I feel these opening bars convey something of forgiveness or holy cleansing. But then comes this chord, and this feeling of gentle purity is overlain by something much more threatening. The rest of the piece maintains this swaying melody in waltz time, which complements the pontiff's swinging and elegant movements. Choosing waltz time is also clever, considering that your battle with him is kind of like a hectic 2-person dance. About halfway through his health, the pontiff makes a dramatic transformation, along with the music. This is far more forceful and threatening. These black wings and the change in music suggest something of a darker nature surrounding the pontiff. Perhaps he is not as forgiving or as holy as he was made out to be. The chord progressions here are clear and direct. Each chord is clearly articulated, which again lends to the boss's constancy. But the harsh music now suggests raw power rather than holy strength. This piece is constant and unwavering, maintaining its tempo and pacing throughout, which is in contrast to some of the other boss themes. This conveys well his fighting style, a skilled and watchful swordsman who rarely leaves himself open. Interestingly, there are a lot of small details about the Pontiff you can find throughout the game, like there are 2 rings you find that are his right and left eyes respectively, meaning he's blind, I guess. The description for one of the swords he wields is especially revealing. Taken as a whole, his boss battle theme conveys well his fighting style and his personality as this religious holy figure that possibly succumbed to some thirst for power. The opening bars are bumbling and somewhat muted. The melody is hidden behind this awful droning and weird chanting. This is perhaps reminiscent of the voices of all these undead worshippers who are praising this tree as you enter the battlefield. There is also plentiful use of tritone in the melody throughout. The tritone is an interval of precisely half an octave, or 6 semitones. Despite this nice-sounding ratio, the tritone is actually one of the most dissonant sounds in music. Its frequent use in this piece further reinforces the monstrous nature of this film. The next few bars present this melody that is atonal, meaning there is no central tone the chords are based on. Most of the music we listen to today is centered on tonality and chords, and to hear a song without it sounds kind of unpleasant and downright awful. But this characterizes the Great Wood perfectly, being this blind, wandering being that is imbued with countless curses, something that was once natural and concordant, twisted into something unnatural and dissonant. In the second phase of the battle, things get pretty weird. The piece degenerates into this forceful cacophony, and then there are these ascending vocals and strings. This melody is almost barbaric in its forceful simplicity. Unlike Pontiff Sullivan, who had complex, clear chord progressions, the music of this phase is utterly lacking in harmonic variety. This mimics the Great Wood's movement and method of attack perfectly, even with this third fleshy arm that is still just blindly swinging its body around in a primitive fashion. An interesting note is the similarity of this boss battle theme to that of one of the later bosses in the game, the Old Demon King. The piece for the Old Demon Kings also makes extensive use of atonality and the tritone, and features these sections of chanting-like vocals. Thematically, both of these beings are pagan in a sense, the Old Demon King being affiliated with the once worshipped Chaos of Izalith long ago, whatever that means. It's interesting that both of these pieces are musically similar, but the bosses are so different in design and where you find them. The Great Wood is near the top of the world early on in the game, and the Demon King deep underground and found much later. At first glance, it's unsure who the actual boss is in this fight. You can try to attack the guy with the red flame, but the flame sometimes just moves on to someone else. This kind of puzzle-like approach, without a direct target, is highlighted by the quiet and subdued opening bars of this track, which is really good. This piece has a similarity to some cathedral music, such as Anglican chant, for obvious reasons, although this is still a clever musical style to adopt here. Overall, this piece has this feeling of suffering and sadness, which is very different from the threatening music of Pontiff Sullivan. This music is wandering and uncertain, reflecting the pace of the battle. It also feels a bit mindless and disjointed, and there are these strings, woodwinds, and vocals all playing distinct melodic lines in parallel. And I feel this conveys this personality of the Deacons really well. It seems as if they are acting independently to try and accomplish something, but aren't succeeding since they are so weak acting alone. But then, the red flame disappears when the head deacon reveals himself, and these disparate voices are suddenly unified. This is a really cool musical technique. Unlike other boss battles where the music just gets kind of louder with more instruments and the boss just gets more powerful, in this battle, the change in music reflects a change in purpose. Now we know who the bad guy is. Also, a good sound design choice here is the cries of the head deacon when he's casting that crazy curse garbage magic. It really adds to the feeling of despair and suffering this music conveys, especially when the screen goes completely dark. Like with the other bosses, many of the item descriptions yield precious information about their lore. Overall, this piece conveys well the nature of suffering and corruption surrounding the Cathedral of the Deep. Wow, first of all, this boss has a bizarre design. This lifeless, pale female body sits atop a heaving mound of sentient flesh and slime. Immediately, the music conveys this exactly, with this tremulous and beautiful female choir presented above a horrific cacophony of organ, strings, and bass representing the fleshy body. There's also a lot of stylized use of compression here. By this I mean sound compression, such that the range of frequencies in an audio signal are compressed into a smaller range while preserving the original sound to an extent. Here, compression seems to apply in varying degrees across several sections, creating this subtle impression of synthetic expanding and squeezing or contracting. This, combined with the wavering and high-pitched vocals, convey to me the sound of something straining itself or being strained. Perhaps it has something to do with the disjointed bodies of Aldrich, which are incompatible with one another and are barely holding together. The description of his scythe reveals that he has indeed consumed a god. Oh my goodness, perhaps this is the representation of the human part of Aldrich, this god that he's forcefully consumed. This unnatural fusion is perfectly conveyed by this discordant music, as I mentioned, and there's this motif of an ascending fifth interval by the lead vocalist. Which sound to me is like a desperate attempt by the god to escape upwards out of its prison before they are reeled back in by Aldrich. while the music for the curse-rotted Greatwood conveys a blind, cursed creature who unwillingly received its powers. The music for Aldrich conveys a truly evil being bent on consuming the gods to purposely obtain greater power.
For the sake of time, I narrowed my choices down to these bosses in particular, but there are plenty of other battle themes that uniquely characterize their boss. One thing I have to criticize the game for is how it handles some aspects of sound design, however. The brilliant and detailed scores for the bosses are usually masked by the screams and smashes of battle. For the most part, you aren't even listening to the music, it's only there in the background, which is a real shame. Of course, this is a common issue with action-adventure games, but I feel it is exacerbated in this game due to boss battles being one of the only times music is heard throughout the game. Most of the exploration of the world is without any musical accompaniment. I mean, I guess you could just turn down your sound effects volume and raise the music, but there are more creative ways to handle this, like reducing the amount of sound effects to use, or pitching sound effects so that they don't interfere with the frequencies of music as much. For example, if you have a lot of bass, choir, and strings in the soundtrack, give the boss a slightly higher-pitched voice as to not interfere with the choirs. Anyway, I guess it's time to take a step back in time and pick up Dark Souls 2. Who knows, maybe I'll have a video on that one as well.